You froze up a little bit there.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're back. All right.
Okay.
I think I can probably guess what you said. So I'm Aurora Velasquez. I'm the executive director of ACT Philly, and ACT is the private nonprofit organization contracted to provide animal services for the city of Philadelphia. We serve approximately 1.6 million people. We see 18,000 animals or so each year, mostly cats and dogs. This whole COVID situation, I think, has been huge in so many ways for shelters all across the country, and definitely here in Philly. We're seeing tremendous response from the community when it comes to fostering and pet adoption, and really a flexibility in what that looks like and how the community and the shelter works together. That's really been pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. So the one thing I think that's interesting that not a lot of people understand, so maybe you can, define this a little bit. Animal control in Philadelphia is what people call, or what we call in the animal welfare space, an open admission shelter. What does that mean as compared to some of the other shelters that are out there?
Yeah, so, at its most basic definition, an open admissions animal shelter is one that is available to take in any animal in need. There are ways that look different at different organizations. Some use appointments, some is sort of an open door policy. We're somewhere in the middle. But essentially it means that whatever the given location that your shelter services, you are available for whomever needs help. We had an email chain going about an hour ago that there was potentially 25 chickens impacted by a fire that may need to come in, and we're still working that out. We're hoping that they're all in good shape and won't need to come in after all. But could be 25 chickens, it could be a cat, it could be a cow. It really, you never know. But it's about figuring it out.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing, especially when you think about the city of Philadelphia. The last thing you think about is chickens. Right. Not many people are like, what, chickens? Is that even legal that they have chickens in the city limits?
It's not, but
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I spent about 6 years as the operations director for the Pennsylvania SPCA. And while I was there, we had a huge humane law enforcement team. So I was fortunate enough to work with some of the coolest people I've ever worked with during that time. And it was the same thing. It's a 24-hour-a-day job, right? It never stops. So chickens at, 9 o'clock on a Friday night, it's normal business for
just another Friday.
Just another Friday. So, Ethan started talking a little bit about fostering and adoption and the trends we're seeing. I mean, with Get Your Pet, I can talk a little bit about the trends we're seeing, but I'd like to hear from your perspective what you're seeing in the bricks and mortar shelter world, and what specifically you're seeing or changing in your day-to-day operations at ACT.
Yeah, what we're seeing and what I'm learning through conversation and with different colleagues, it sounds like a lot of people are seeing is really just an unprecedented level of interest and response from the community around fostering. We've always had fostering available. We've always had adoption services available. But something about this moment in time really has compelled people to come forward. We first in Philly put out messaging about a need for foster and adopters like the second week of March. And within 2 weeks, we had over 1,200 applications for new foster homes, people who had never interacted with ACT Philly before, who just heard that message and for some reason at this particular moment thought, okay, this is time, this is I'm going to go for it. And I think part of that has to do with people have so much time on their hands that they're looking for something constructive to do with it. And I think when shelters like ours are saying there is a significant need, availability of time and need, and the cute face of that cat or dog, like it's a combination that people just can't say no to. So we really looked at how we could meet that significant response from the community. So we did things like set up appointment systems. We reallocated staff who normally don't work to support foster programming to do that, because we wanted to make sure that we touched every one of those 1,200 people, and we're engaging them. At this point, we have our adoption appointments booked out all the way through May already on the first of the month. So there just really seems to be an interest in the community in stepping forward and helping the shelters, and helping their neighbors and the community as well. We're aware of a number of animals who their owners unfortunately were impacted by COVID, but the community figured it out. They came together, they figured out who could take, I think there were 2 cats in South Philly who could take them in rather than them coming to the shelter. So there's a real coming together right now.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think that the trends that we're seeing are incredible. I think all of us that have worked in the animal welfare space would agree that it's probably one of the only jobs out there where you're working every day to put yourself out of business, So it's kind of like, it's counterintuitive, but the fact that you've seen such an amazing response from the community gives me a lot of hope. It's really exciting, and I'm sure that it was like overwhelming for you and your team. But what do you think this means? Like, do you think that this is because we have this pandemic right now? People know they're going to be home for a significant period of time. They're looking for that companionship for an animal. But fast forward a few months when everything goes back to normal, what do you think we're going to see?
I've been asked that question a couple of times, and maybe I'm hopelessly optimistic. But I think it's all going to work out. I think, we're seeing an unprecedented number of animals go into foster, but those animals are also getting adopted from foster, right? Mm-hmm. I think some of the fosters who think that they're only fostering are really going to end up adopting themselves.
Hashtag foster failure.
Exactly.
This girl right here.
I mean, who among us isn't, right?
Yeah.
And I think some other folks are just, they're not going to make the step to adopt their animal, but they're still going to be committed, and they're going to continue to foster until they find the long-term home for that animal to go to. So I really don't foresee very many animals coming back from foster.
I totally agree with you. I think that this is, for a lot of the people who have made the commitment to either adopt or to take a pet into their home for a foster period of time, I think they're going to either find it very hard to give that pet or bring that pet back to a shelter, or to find that pet a new home. And I also think they've probably been thinking about it for a while, and this was just like the trigger that made them act and take action and really, like you said, come together as a community to help out the animal control facility in Philadelphia, but also shelters across the country. We're seeing this. Yeah. And to give you a little perspective from Get Your Pet, I don't think I really even described to the people watching what Get Your Pet is and what we do, but basically our website is a peer-to-peer rehoming platform. So we enable people who need to find a home for their pet to connect directly with people who are looking to adopt a pet, so the pet stays out of the shelter system entirely. And we have a lot of means and mechanisms and filters in place to help people do this in a responsible way. So it's not like a Craigslist or a Facebook. We really guide both sides of the equation through the adoption process and support them. And when an adoption finally occurs through the site, both sides of the equation get legal adoption documentation. They get a voucher to be used at the veterinarian. They get a bunch of other ancillary retail coupons, $40 off at rover.com, all these other cool benefits to the adoption package. So we're not dealing with a bricks and mortar facility, but what we are seeing is very similar trends to what you're seeing. Yeah. And that's a huge increase in people coming to our site to want to adopt a pet, sending messages to other people who have pets they're looking to rehome. And it's just been really encouraging for me, because for a long time, that was our biggest challenge, was making sure we had enough people who want to adopt the pets that are on our site. Now, on the other side, we're seeing fewer and fewer people listing pets for adoption, which is also a very positive thing. Is that what you're seeing at the shelter too? Like less people wanting to surrender pets?
Yes, our intakes are way down. And it's interesting that you're seeing those requests also go down, because, in the shelter, we see that happening, but we're not really sure why. We're not sure if the need has decreased or if more people are taking advantage of things like Get Your Pet. So it's really interesting to hear that you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, we are. And I mean, it's for me, being the animal person that I am, it certainly brings a smile to my face. I do think that there's something to be said that we're doing this social distancing. People aren't leaving their homes, and a lot of times what people expect to hear, and I think you would agree with me here, is that people surrender pets to shelters because they're bad, or people surrender pets to shelters because they're sick, or they're, this or that. No, that's not it at all. At least not from what I see. The pets that are being listed on our site is typically our number one rehoming reason is I don't have enough time to spend with this pet. And suddenly you do have the time. So it's interesting. I'm not sure what we're going to see, but I hope that all of these pets that are being fostered and being adopted end up staying in the homes that they're going into.
Yeah, I think your instinct that the function of time plays a big role into it. And I think the other thing too is we've seen in animal sheltering, like there's been pendulum swings where things were very restrictive and hard to gain access to services. And then we went through a period where, with the open admissions shelters, it was sort of like doors open, on demand service. And I think what we've learned through all of that is when you place small strategic speed bumps in front of people, like social distancing, like it's it's a little bit harder to relinquish a pet to a shelter right now. There's a little bit more time to just figure out those problems that ultimately are solvable. And so I would guess that probably that's happening a little bit too. People just don't have those options available to them. And so they're going to, they're going online and searching, what do I do about this problem? And they're able to figure it out, which, is really the best outcome for that animal to stay.
And that's like a perfect segue into sort of what I wanted to get into next, which is what do you think the future looks like here? Like, we talk in the animal welfare space all the time about how we need to make this shift from shelters being a place where animals are kept, where they live for a long period of time, and then they finally, they get adopted, or maybe they get spayed and neutered and then they get adopted. What is it like? In my opinion, I see like this might be the tipping point where shelters can really make that change into being more of a resource center. Like the person, like you just said, you put these speed bumps. You can't feed your dog. What do? Well, maybe the shelter is a place where you can get free food, right? As opposed to, I can't feed my dog, I have to give my dog up. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the mindset change that we're seeing in the animal welfare industry and why that's so important?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we're going to see two major things happen. One, I think, is there is going to be a huge emphasis on that community support. I think one of the things that COVID has highlighted across the country and in all different communities was there really is a disproportionate impact on people who lack certain means or, don't have certain access to different resources. And shelters have really moved in to fill those gaps because we anticipated that for those people who were impacted, if there was a pet in the household, they may be forced to look at options like surrendering just because, they were in a tight spot. And so to avoid that, lots of shelters put together programming very quickly to try and meet that need. Something that we did at Act Philly was we held, historically, we've held a pet food pantry twice a month. And we were able to help about 50 people each time we did that. And with social distancing, we couldn't have lines of people hanging out in our parking lot waiting for their food. So we just transitioned it to a couple of people every day by appointment, and making that small switch, we're serving twice as many people. So it's really forced different shelters to just figure out how to serve communities in ways that are quick, easy, and low cost in terms of delivery. And I think lots of us are seeing that that's actually pretty easy to do, much easier than I think we would have thought. And so I think that's going to become a big focus. I think the other big thing that we're going to see is around fostering. The response from the community is undeniable, and so many more animals are going into foster in shelters around the country that I think some animals that historically shelters have been hesitant to send into foster have been going, and it's working out beautifully. So I think shelters are really going to move to a place where we focus on the people part and the resource part, and work to keep animals in the community, in homes, versus kennels in a shelter.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more because, obviously with Get Your Pet, everything we do is from one good home to another, right? We believe that a pet is going to do so much better in that transition instead of coming out of a shelter environment where they're stressed and they're scared. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're always going to need shelters. We're always going to need those resources for pets that are, stray animals and have nowhere else to go. But pets that are in a home with someone who can be their advocate and say, look, I can't keep this pet for any longer. Maybe my mom got sick and I can't, I ended up with her dog. I didn't really want this dog, whatever the case may be. And they can be this pet's advocate, just like your foster parents. They know that pet better than anyone. They can talk about that pet better than anyone can. They know, do they get scared at thunderstorms or, do they love lettuce? I don't know, so like whatever the case may be, they can be an amazing advocate. And it just leans itself to so many more successful adoptions when you're adopting pets directly out of a foster home and they're going into their new home and those two people can have a communication, or in our case, they're going from home to home. I mean, we get these amazing stories from people who are just so happy because they're like, this was incredible. I got this wonderful dog and I was able to talk directly with someone who has lived with this pet, who knows everything about this pet, and there's no surprises, I think it's one other thing I wanted to ask you about is, historically in the animal sheltering world, it was if you adopted a pet and you had to bring the pet back to the shelter, it was really frowned upon. And one of the things I've seen, it seems now that shelters have really changed their mindset on that. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important about trying to be having a little bit more relaxed adoption policies and open conversation-based adoptions, and things like returning the pet to the shelter isn't like the worst crime you could ever commit again?
Well, I think that the last bit about returning the pet to the shelter is interesting because we exist because we want to be that safe haven for animals. And we tell people, if you can't keep this pet, bring them back. And then they do that and we get mad at them. I think it goes back to everybody wants to believe that every match is going to be the right one, and that regardless of the issues that arise, it's going to be figure outable. I know that's not a word, but that's just not life. We know that animals in shelters, shelters are a super artificial environment, so we're not getting the best read on who an animal is and what their personality is like, what their needs are going to be like in a home environment. So many adoption matches, are sort of done on a wish and a prayer, because there's only so much information that's available. And I think shelters increasingly are realizing that is the case. Even in the best shelter with the most accomplished, behavior team and resources, are only going to get a snapshot of who that animal is. And I think as we've started to recognize that, we're realizing that sometimes it's just not going to work out. It's incumbent on our shelters to do the best that we can to make sure that we provide resources and support to adopters. So that way, if it is an issue that can be worked out, they're able to work that out. But at the end of the day, if it's not working, we want those animals to come back to us. So that way they can go into the home that's right for them, and be happy and successful long term. And potentially, find the right animal for that household, so they can also have that great pet relationship, and they get what they need out of it. I think it's in many ways adoptions that don't work out are very similar to foster homes. The animals have no understanding that one is an adoption that didn't work and one's a foster home and one's good or one's bad. The animal's experience is largely the same. And often when they come back, we know more about them now. So that next placement we're better prepared for. It's a big cultural shift, but I think the industry is making that turn.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So what do you think right now? I mean, we're here tonight talking because we're raising money for pet businesses, not-for-profit rescues and shelters, and we know all these pets are going into homes. We know we need all of these businesses to be around, and that's why I was so eager to participate. I also want to say my husband is doing a segment tomorrow morning. Dr. John Marcus will be on 9:30 Eastern time, our time, and 8:30 Central time. He's talking about keeping people and pets safe at the veterinary office during the COVID-19 pandemic. So be sure to tune into that. But that's why it's like near and dear to my heart, because we have a veterinary hospital and we want to make sure these businesses are still open. And I know that the shelter world, donations are key. You need donations to stay alive. So, do you see that as a huge challenge going forward for not-for-profit rescues and shelters to be able to fundraise the way they need to continue their operations?
Absolutely. I mean, this pandemic has hit people in ways that no one could have anticipated. So many people are out of a job, or, their hours have been reduced. For many people, I'm sure that the last thing on their mind is, where can I donate this week? But really the money, I think, that is donated to organizations like Act Philly, like other shelters around the country, much of it goes right back into the community. I mentioned that pet food pantry that's, supplying hundreds of families with food for their animals. That's fully funded by donations from the community. So I think if folks have the means and can make that contribution, it's really looking at it as an investment in their own community and the livelihood of their friends and neighbors.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully put. I mean, I don't know that the same donation dollars are going to be able to be accessed, and that's scary for me because there's so many wonderful nonprofit rescues and shelters doing such amazing work. And I would encourage anyone who's listening to this or watching this, to make a donation to the Streamathon for Pets. They're doing an amazing job of putting money back into communities all across the country. And find out who your local open admission shelter is, because all shelters and rescues are doing great work, don't get me wrong, but those are the shelters that are, they're getting some tax dollars. It's never enough, I can tell you that. And they're doing incredible work, and they're really, the community needs them above all else, because they can never say no to anybody who is coming to them for help. So it's extremely important to make sure that we're funding
ask any of your friends that are watching to please donate even $5.
I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. There was somebody else talking there. I don't know where that voice came from. Anyways, yeah. So but all signs, there's definitely some silver lining here. It's pretty incredible that we're seeing this increase in adoptions, this increase in fostering, increase of site traffic. We only have a few minutes left, I know, but the one thing I wanted to ask you specifically, Aurora, was, you thankfully have been a supporter of Get Your Pet since we started. And I want you to talk, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about why this rehoming tool that we've created is important and was important before the COVID-19 pandemic, and why it should be a staple for every shelter and rescue out there going forward, because it's, keeping pets out of the shelter. So if you could talk about that a little bit, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I am a huge proponent of Get Your Pet. Look, I run a shelter. I've worked in shelters for over 15 years. I've seen some really incredible facilities. I've seen some not great facilities. But even the nicest animal shelter is still not someone's home. It's still a place that is stressful, that exposes animals to all sorts of stimuli that's not normal. And so from that animal's perspective, being in a more comfortable, more normal environment is going to have a whole host of positive implications for their behavior, for their health. And then beyond that, you mentioned earlier just the benefits of the person-to-person connection, the person who is unfortunately having to give up their pet, doing one of the hardest things that they probably will ever have to do, connecting with the person who's potentially going to provide that long-term home for their pet. And it really gives the new adopter an opportunity to learn firsthand who this animal is and how they're going to fit into their lives. And for the person who's relinquishing their animal, has the potential to really turn something that has always been a negative, sort of judgment laden situation into something that could almost be empowering. They're having an active role in making sure the rest of their pet's life is good, and that animal is going into a loving home. And so I think it really, it's good for the animals. It's good for all of the people involved. And it's good for the shelters because, like you said, our ultimate goal is to put ourselves out of business. And the only way to get there is by keeping animals out of the shelters, and focusing really only on the ones who absolutely have to come in because they have no other options.
Perfectly stated. I should get you on the Get Your Pet team. Well, I know we're wrapping up, but this has been a really enjoyable conversation. And again, I hope everyone out there who is watching us is donating.